When this changes, and I've watched this change with thousands of people over the last 20 plus years, their life changes on a dime. They get rid of all different kinds of destructive behaviors. They will literally put themselves in a new position in their life where they can create the amount of money, the amount of freedom, the relationships, anything that they want, because they no longer filter things through what we call a core wound. Hey everyone, David Nagel here. Today I want to talk to you about core wounds. This is a bit of a heavier topic, but understanding this information can make a huge difference in your life and how you approach everything in your life. So the idea here is, what is a core wound, who has a core wound, and what do we do about it once we find out that we have one? So first of all, understand everybody has a core wound. A core wound basically comes from some point in our childhood, usually between the time of conception until the age of about 7 years old, where we understand that we have a significant vulnerability with our parents. The vulnerability is basically this: human beings will die if they do not have an adult that can take care of them and help guide them through a good part of the first portion of their life. It's very important to understand this, because it's not like we're born with a core wound. It comes from the awareness that there is a vulnerability that is present, and that if we don't understand how to communicate with our parents, we simply don't get our needs met. And that is the suggestion that creates a core wound to begin with. But I want to make something very clear. A core wound is basically a pattern that gets created in childhood that helps us navigate our childhood until we become adults. We're born without the ability to talk, yet we have needs that have to be met. So in some way, we have to learn to communicate with our parents or the people that are raising us in order to get those needs met. The parent's responsibility is to begin to understand what it is that we're communicating so that they can actually meet our needs. But what happens when there is a miscommunication that takes place? And the child then has to overcome that miscommunication in order to find a way to get the needs met. The internal process that takes place during that time period is that the child starts to internalize that possibly there's something wrong with him or her. Doesn't mean that there really is, but children process through the filter of themselves. They think the world revolves around themselves. So with a core wound, what ends up happening is that it generally develops around two ideas. One is love, and the other one is worth. Is the child worthy of being loved, and is the child worthy of receiving the things that it needs in order for it to grow up and be healthy? If the parent is not communicating this in a generous, consistent way, the child may be under the assumption that there's something wrong with him or her, that they don't get their needs met. And what reinforces this is something called shame and guilt. Now, children are not born with shame and guilt, but shame and guilt is something that is taught and used in almost every religion around the world, and you won't find a society anywhere that I'm aware of that does not use shame and guilt in a way to help move and correct the behavior of children and people. The thing about shame and guilt that's so destructive is that once it's installed in the mind of the individual, it then self-replicates, kind of like the hard drive of a computer. Once you program it and tell it what to do, it doesn't need any more outside advice to be able to carry through with the program. Children are very much the same way. Shame is basically this idea that a person thinks there is something intrinsically wrong with them as a person, and guilt says there's something wrong with what we're doing. If I am exposed to enough shame and guilt in my life, anything that triggers my core wound, that even suggests that I'm not worthy or that I'm not lovable, will cause me to go into a shame or a guilt spiral, so to speak, and I will start to see myself as not worthy or not lovable. I will beat myself up with shame. I will think to myself that I'm a shameful person, that there's something intrinsically wrong with who I am, the fundamental of me as a spiritual person that is really trying to produce and live a magnificent life. It becomes almost impossible for me to do it because my core belief is that there's something wrong with me, or there's something wrong with what I'm doing. The problem that then emanates from this part of the process is that we start keeping secrets. Now, why would we do this? Well, because the idea with shame is that it's shameful. It's basically saying this is something that you should be embarrassed by. This is something that you should not feel good about. And what ends up happening is that we don't want the world to know. So we will make mistakes. We will do things, especially as children, very much out of ignorance or very much out of the replication of watching other people do things. And then we don't feel good about it. So what do? We hide it. And as we hide it, it's basically keeping a secret. So you might want to write this down. Here's what a secret is in the context of how I'm explaining core wounds. A secret is anything that you've done that you have shame or guilt around, anything that someone has done to you that you have shame and guilt around, or they have shame and guilt around, anything that you've witnessed being done or that you've known that has been done that there is shame and guilt around, and you do not want this exposed because of whatever the threat is around it, that there's something wrong with you, or that it's your fault, or that you have to be ashamed or guilty for this thing. It is then kept as a secret. And as that secret is suppressed in the mind, it causes us to establish what we know is a core fear. It's pretty much well known that human beings are only born with two fears, the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. But a core fear is not something that's established right from birth. It's something that grows, and it grows out of a vulnerability. The vulnerability is basically this: it is possible for us to die if we don't get our needs met. Because there is this vulnerability that is open, the subconscious mind is aware of this vulnerability. The one thing that it associates with it is abandonment. What if my parents leave me? What if the people that are in charge of me literally walk away and abandon me in my life? Biologically, we know that that could lead to death. So what the child does is it begins to develop different patterns and different roles in life. These are specifically with the intention of finding a way that gets our needs met, that gets the attention of the parental figures in our life to get our needs met, and then it develops patterns of behavior that we continue to follow through with until we become an adult. Now, here's the issue with a core wound. If you're being raised in a healthy environment, one of the responsibilities of a parent is to help a child get to the point of adulthood and slowly, but certainly and confidently turn over your own responsibility to you. Put it in your hands. You become a responsible adult. You're responsible for your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, what you do, what you intend to do, and the things that happen in your life. However, if you don't have a mature adult that understands this, what ends up happening is quite different. And the difference is that in our mind, in our subconscious mind, we keep the parent or the people that had authority over us in our childhood while we were in our youth, in our mind as the current authority. Meaning, I could be 25, 35, 45, 55 years old, and if I've never accepted my own authority in my mind unconsciously, my parents are still the authority. That means that I am filtering what I think, what I do, what I want to be, what I want to have, how I view my life through the filter of whether or not I will be approved or disapproved of by my parents, whether I will be loved and literally looked at as a worthy human being, or is there a risk of abandonment there? And this literally carries on into a person's adult life until they become aware that this process is taking place. Because once they become aware that the process is taking place, they can do something that is probably the most powerful thing in their life, and that is to take back ownership, perhaps for the first time, ownership of who they really are. Be their own adult, be their own authority. And we get out of the cycle of these roles and these patterns. The old behaviors stop, we begin to have new experiences, our results change for the better, and we literally can create the environment of our dreams. We can be, do, or have whatever we want. But for us to think that the problems that we're experiencing in our life are being caused by anything other then the proper understanding of these core wounds is in detriment to humanity in and of itself. When this changes, and I've watched this change with thousands of people over the last 20 plus years, their life changes on a dime. They get rid of all different kinds of destructive behaviors. They will literally put themselves in a new position in their life where they can create the amount of money, the amount of freedom, the relationships, anything that they want, because they no longer filter things through what we call a core wound. The way to heal it is to own it, take responsibility for it, understand how it's actually operating in you, and then to create new behaviors that put you in charge of your life, because ultimately you are your own authority. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss any of my upcoming videos. I recommend that you watch this video multiple times and reflect upon it. Leave a comment below if you have any questions. See you again really soon.